Regular and proper hand washing has been the cornerstone of the global campaign to keep people away from coronavirus infection. The awareness created thus far by that campaign has been highly impressive, and this, in addition to the widespread use of face masks, hand sanitizers and gloves, might be the reason fatalities resulting from the pandemic are still in their thousands, not millions. In Nigeria, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo last week inaugurated the steering committee of the Clean Nigeria Use the Toilet campaign, which he leads as chairman. In the aftermath of that inauguration, he said, in quotes, "We are embarking upon this initiative at a most auspicious time. As our nation confronts the COVID-19 pandemic, we recognize that expanding access to water, sanitation, and hygiene wash facilities is our most effective weapon against the scourge of infectious diseases. For greater scrutiny, we're now being joined by Adeola Asabia, co-founder of the firm MN Environmental Services, to address the problem of poor access to adequate sanitation, a problem which has resulted in the widespread practice of open defecation in Nigeria. Welcome to the program. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks
Good
for
morning.
having us.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you too for joining us. Well, let's talk about this Use the Toilet campaign. In November 2019, President Buhari signed what was called Executive Order 009, which was titled Ending Open Defecation in Nigeria by the year 2025. Now, this is consistent, of course, with Sustainable Development Goal number 6. And now, a few days ago, we had a steering committee being announced, and it's led by the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo. But do you think that this objective of ensuring open defecation-free Nigeria by 2025, do you think it's achievable, given the many distortions that we have in terms of public enlightenment, in terms of access to water, or even the basic infrastructure that should make this possible?
First of all, I think it's a very good initiative. I know that we didn't meet up with the Millennium Development Goals, but that with said, it's good that they're embarking, and I'm hoping that it'll be with a much more vigorous attempt at ensuring that people do have access to water, sanitation. It's very, very important, even at this time with the pandemic. You'll be surprised to know that statistics show that at least 122,000 people, adults, and about 85,000 children die daily from diarrhea, from poor sanitary-related illnesses. So it's a welcome idea. The only thing that I would hope, because it's not enough just to embark on it with the steering committee, you need to go further than information dissemination. You really need to have a strong advocacy campaign where there's plenty of awareness and where it's getting to the right people.
To address the derision and jokes in some quarters, particularly with the opposition, that was the response to the Vice President chairing this committee. Can you explain to us exactly why it's no laughing matter and why this is of crucial importance, especially now in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, I haven't heard the joke, and I don't see what's so funny about that. But I think it's a laudable idea to actually, take it on head on, especially in the midst of a pandemic. I mean, people are getting infected. You don't want them to now be dealing with underlying diseases like typhoid, septicemia, or, any of these illnesses that would really reduce their chances of being able to make it. So I don't think it's funny. I've not heard the jokes. I think, this is just party politics and trying to bash the other government for, coming up with a good initiative. I think we should lay aside politics and really try and best to stay alive and to support. I would rather, it would be better for them to be supporting the government or coming up with their own ideas, just like shadow cabinets do in the UK. If you have an issue, say it well, but don't try to start bashing them, come up with your own ideas. I think we should lay aside politics in this regard.
Certainly. Let's also discuss the practical steps and projects that we're likely to see from this campaign. I mean, when you look at the statistics around us, the situation is dire. About a quarter of Nigerians today practice open defecation, yet here we are also trying to end that by 2025. Firstly, how hopeful are you in us achieving our goals, and what practical steps are we likely to see coming out of the campaign to achieve this?
Well, I know that we didn't meet up with the Millennium Development Goals, and we did have a goal to eradicate open defecation. So that in itself, puts a bit of a slight worry. But I'm hoping that the new initiatives I would like to see is more multi-sectoral collaboration. I was amazed at how, the private sector and private institutions came on board to support government with all this COVID issue. Companies gave foodstuffs, they gave money. I mean, they really stepped up. I mean, if they hadn't, I think that, we'd be in a more dire situation. So I'd like to see more of that play out. The government reaching out again to the public sector and saying, this is priority and we want you to support us. You need to be able to give them something to be able to encourage them to start funding, sanitation projects. Give them tax breaks. Go to the banks, insurance companies, give them tax breaks. The tax issue is really, stifling business and development. Well, so that would be one of my own suggestions.
Well, on May 28, when the steering committee was inaugurated, the vice president pointed out that only just about 28 local governments in Nigeria out of 774 are open defecation free, in line with the open defecation protocols. Now, I didn't quite understand that because he didn't go into the details. Now, what is an open defecation protocol? On what basis will you say that a particular community is open defecation free? Is it the number of toilets that is available in that particular community? Is it access to water? Or is it the people's observance of hygienic practices? Maybe you help us clarify that.
I think it's all of the things that you have said. I mean, a lot of houses that were built in states, they don't have toilets. They have pit latrines, or they go to the bushes to go and ease themselves. So a lot of houses were built without sanitary facilities. So yes, if you want to know whether they are open defecation free, you need to ensure that homes have proper toilets in which people can go and do their private businesses. And of course, when you have toilets, you must have running water. So water and sanitation go together. There must be water for you to flush the toilet. There must be running water for you to wash your hands with soap. So I would imagine that yes, you would know when there's a reduction, when you stop seeing visuals of people, men easing themselves openly in the gutter, women having to go to the bushes to do the big job. Sometimes we have in markets, because there are no toilets in markets, well, a lot of them. So you see the shop owners having plastic bags, doing their business in the plastic bags, and then at night throwing it, over the bridges or throwing it in the bushes. So we want to see a stop to that. Once we stop seeing those visuals, it'll be a wake-up call that, oh, okay, so there is now access to public toilets. Proper toilets. When there is access, you will not see all of these, horrible visuals of people going and doing it openly. And there's running water. Water and sanitation go together.
In the typical fashion, there are funding challenges. It's been estimated that Nigeria needs 959 billion naira to meet SDG Goal 6. What are those strategies that we can employ to surmount these funding challenges? Because apparently the government has to provide 25% of that money and households are to provide the other 75%. Is this true, and how does this work?
Well, I don't really know too much about the details of this steering committee and what they have on board. But what I would imagine is that, let's face it, we can't rely on government for everything. Government cannot and are not even able to fund all of these programs themselves.
Please hold your thoughts, Mrs. Asabia. We need to take a quick break and we'll be back with more. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show. Here on Arise News, we're still with Adeola Asabia, co-founder of MN Environmental Services. Mrs. Asabia, before the break, you were telling us about the funding challenges and how to go about surmounting them.
Yes, I was saying that, the reality on the ground is that government cannot fund these programs alone. We know where we are. With the prices of oil going down, our expenses way more, are much more than our income coming in. So the government would need to look out to development partners, to the private institutions, which I said earlier on, really rose up to the occasion. I mean, the money was there. It was just they needed something to, push them to bring the funding there. So I think government need to be creative. Like I said, invite them into the projects, get them to give them tax breaks. And also there are players out there, who are working in the water and sanitation space. If you say to them, if you build toilets in these cities, we'll give you the land, you look for the funding, we'll give you a moratorium after maybe, certain agreed number of years, then you can now start paying some kind of a levy. You need to come up with incentives so that everybody knows that, okay, this is business, it's for public good, and, there's going to be a win-win situation. It's going to be mutually agreeable, and it's a win-win situation. So government needs to really reach out to the private sector. The funding is there. They have the money. It's just that what are you going to, what incentives are you going to give them for them to come on board? Once you make it a priority and say, listen, we need you to come on board, even banking institutions, they can come up with creative instruments, that they can raise, even going to the capital market. So there are so many ways in which you can raise funds for this great initiative.
Certainly there are, and the private sector has to be involved in order for us to see the level of change that we want to see. But I'd like to speak to you now particularly about how women are affected by this, because I'm looking at some data from UNICEF and UK Aid that shows, and this is data that they collected in 2012, just to point out, but it shows that a quarter of women defecating in open do not have a latrine at home. It also showed that a quarter of women had either first or second-hand experience of harassment, a threat of violence, or actual assault in the previous 12 months, due to having to openly defecate. And 56% of women finally avoid using the toilet at certain times of the day to avoid being at potential risk. So how would you like to see the Use the Toilet campaign addressing these particular concerns that do affect women?
Oh, definitely. Women are, at the brunt of it. And even if we bring it, closer to home, I remember many years ago, we visited some secondary schools. And, it was so sad to know that a lot of them don't even come to school. They know when they're going to have their period, and so they will stay away from school. Many of them, when they come to school, they make sure that they don't eat before coming, so they don't have to, there'll be no bowel movements, and these are girls. So, yes, and of course, we've heard of the horrendous stories of, girls going to the bushes, doing the big job or whatever, and then being apprehended by, by all these, horrible men that try to now take advantage of them. So yes, I would want to see very much so this campaign to protect women from all of these harassments by providing them with proper toilets in schools, especially primary level, secondary level, and even in the tertiary institutions. Yes, and I think that that's a sore point, and it really does need to be addressed.
Well, I think it's a good thing to have menstrual hygiene-friendly toilets to address the concerns of women. But it's one thing to build toilets. It's another thing to ask the people to use the toilets. But in the absence of a central sewage system and even waste treatment system across Nigeria, are we not overlooking an important part of that value chain?
Well, yes. I mean, that's another issue that needs to be addressed. Even in the well-to-do areas, they still don't have this central addressed sewage system. So everybody is still going back to the same method of wastewater tanks and septic tanks. Yes, of course, that would be the ideal, to have a central sewage system. But that shouldn't stop us from having toilets and making do for now with the septic tanks. But of course, trying to encourage, we also have players in the industry who have come up with these environmentally friendly sewage tanks. They just need to be involved in the whole program. They're out there. I mean, I know that some estates have central sewage systems. But it can be national, it can be statewide. But you need to invite these players to come on board with you in terms of designing and building a central sewage system.
So what do you think of the legislative approach that has been taken in Ondo State, where a law has been passed against open defecation, in comparison to sort of a behavior change campaign, which is what the steering committee is advocating, and we've seen a lot of recently. There's no law compelling us to wash our hands, but there's been so much sensitization that now, hopefully, we all do. What do you think is the most effective approach here?
It's one thing to have a legislation. It's another thing for application. And I think there should be a particular focus on the grassroots, on the informal sector, who a lot of these laws are targeting, markets, low-income areas. You need to be able to go beyond information dissemination. You need to now advocate and let there be an awareness. Because at the end of the day, if they don't really understand what you're saying, they won't buy the idea. They won't buy the legislation, and you'll continue to get repeat offenders. You need to go down to the level. You need to advocate, have awareness campaigns, use the grassroots sector, go to the ward section, the ward councillors, the market women associations, the community development associations. You can't be in State House and say that, right, we have this legislation and therefore it must be obeyed. That is for the middle class to be able to, understand. You need to go to the informal sector, to the grassroots, and bring it down to their level and let them have an understanding that this is for your own good. At the end of the day, when you have legislation, it's up to you to use your own personal responsibility to obey the civic laws. But if you don't have an informed decision, an informed mind, how will you go about obeying? As far as they're concerned, they just think that governments are being wicked to them. They don't understand their plight. Once you go to their level and use the proper mediums to get them to understand that it is for their own good, have pictorial campaigns, have messages.
Certainly, and I mean, strategic communication at this point is... Certainly, can you hear me?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
No, I didn't get that.
Okay, no, I was saying that strategic communication at this point is absolutely key for human behavioral change. And across Africa, we have seen different innovations coming out that people have come up with to try and support the fight against COVID-19. In Ghana, for example, we saw some students putting together some solar-powered hand washing basins, etc. And we've seen a lot of creativity floating around. What would you like to see more of in that regard? And how can governments support the efforts that we're seeing from a lot of young Africans right now?
Yes, I've seen some locally fabricated hand wash basins. I've seen them in bus terminals. I would like to see more of that. I've also seen best practice in the UK, which I'd like to see adopted here, where you have markings, on the floor, on the ground, in bus shelters, to enable them to know where to stand when they're queuing up, or even when they're, getting into the bus, have the seats marked so that they know that you can sit here, you can't sit there. So there's adequate spacing. So I'd like to see more of, signage at the bus shelter saying, no masks, no entry into the buses. You need to give them pictorial signs. You need to write it down in messages that are self-explanatory and are easy to understand. Break it down into languages, English, vernacular. Have radio jingles, not elitist radio stations, but radio jingles in played by radio stations that are widely listened to, not just by the middle class, but also the informal sector, the grassroots. So by the time they see all of these pictorials, these visuals, and they'll know that, oh, this is what they're supposed to do. And they can take an informed decision on, okay, this is where I'm going to stand. You people, you're not allowed to stand here. This is where you'll stand. Because there are markings on the ground, on the floor, in bus stations, in the markets. You have more, hand washing basins in markets. I would like to see more of that play out.
Certainly. Thank you very much for joining us this morning,
Thank you very much
Asabia.
indeed.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day.